Hi everyone, welcome to this DevOps chat. I'm really delighted to have with me Rich Mironov, who is an expert on product management. You've written a great book on product management. I've seen some of your talks. So firstly, Rich, thank you very much for joining us.
Oh, thrilled for the chance. Thank you.
And perhaps before we start talking about product management and how that relates to DevOps, it'd be great if you could give us a little bit of information about your background, what you've worked on in the past, and what your interests are at the moment.
Sure, I'd love to. So I'm a 30-year veteran out here in Silicon Valley. I live in San Francisco, and about the first 15 years of that was working in product management in enterprise kind of software and technology companies. Tandem computers back in the days of the mini computer when dinosaurs roamed Cupertino. Sybase in the early days of the database wars when it was Oracle and Informix and Ingress against us. A series of startups in network security and sort of gritty bit level stuff. The last 15 years, for the most part, I've been consulting as an independent product management expert. The most fun gigs there are when I parachute into companies as the temporary or interim VP of product, Chief Product Officer. Generally, that's when things are not going well at the very senior level. And we think of those as the smoke jumper jobs because they drop you behind the fire line and you've got to sort of work your way back out. Generally, those conclude by my helping the company interview and hire the full-time permanent VP of product or Chief Product Officer so that I can hand the keys over and leave. So exciting work and generally, a chance to really show some chops about straightening out products and engineering and, getting products that people want to pay money for.
Fantastic. And I suppose with that background, you're perhaps one of the most experienced. I say most experienced. You've perhaps one of the people with the widest experience of product management because, as you say, you've worked in many companies.
Right.
And then also you've seen lots of companies through the consulting work that you do.
Indeed, I think I've worked with, at this point, perhaps 100 companies.
Wow, yes.
And there's a tremendous amount of view that you get sampling, horizontal sampling of patterns and behaviors and structures that are hard to see if you're with the same company for 3 or 15 years, because you start to believe that your company is doing it, that everyone else is doing it your way.
The only way.
And that's the correct way. And so most of my writing and posts and stuff, which are about the sort of executive level problems of running product organizations, tend to be this sort of cross-organizational sampling of why do salespeople at all enterprise companies behave the same, instead of why are the salespeople in my enterprise company so frustrating?
Yeah, you see the patterns, I guess, that are very common between companies.
Exactly right.
And you see the things that are perhaps more specific.
That's right. And one last thought there is I'm way back, I'm a reformed engineer, if there is such a thing. I go to the meeting. I haven't actually written code since COBOL was, the soup of the day. But it's really important in all of my work to understand and appreciate and support the engineering function, good development, good morale, and organizational structures for building software. Because if we don't do that, there's nothing to sell and there's nothing to buy.
Yeah, which I guess leads us nicely into DevOps, and perhaps you could start by giving us your views about why a product manager? Because I think sometimes product managers think, I choose the features, I decide what we build, all the rest, that can be someone else's problem. So why do you think product managers should even care about DevOps? Why is it important to them?
Yeah, a good question, and it may be less obvious than it should be, but certainly as the head of a product management team or as the product manager who's trying to get the best product shipped over the long term, we as product managers must be paying attention to the care and feeding of all of the good engineering and development practices, because otherwise what we do is we trade everything off for this quarter's features, and next quarter we are deeper in tech debt and further behind on automated testing and 15 more code threads and all of the bad things that happen when you get into this sort of feature factory model of I don't care about anything except what customers can see this month. Right. I mean, that's, if I think about the housing equivalent, that's, tearing down the wood paneling in your house to feed the furnace, right? Because you need to stay warm this week. At the end of it, you've got a lot of bad results. So when I see product managers who only care about the customer visible features, I expect that they're making unconscious or inappropriate trade-offs against how engineering really has to run.
So that's a really interesting point, because I think in some of the previous DevOps chats we've talked about the kind of quest to deliver value, focusing everyone on value, what's going to deliver something useful for the customer. And I don't think anyone would say that's not important. But from what you're saying, I guess actually there are other things that are also important that the customer they don't care about it explicitly.
Right.
But when the code is so complicated and spaghetti-like that you can't add a feature, or when there are bugs every 5 minutes, then they do care. So
that's right.
How do you strike that balance?
So I think if we take a slightly wider view of, let's imagine we're in some kind of agile model and, counting work and story points, not that it matters, right? But a handy metric. If I look at, let's say, a quarter's worth of story point investments as an investment portfolio, right? I expect I'm going to spend, let's say, 50% of my scarce, rare, expensive story points on customer visible features and stuff.
Yep.
Right. So, we need a new API. We need to revise our workflow, our user interface. These are the things that when we ship this quarter's increment, we're going to put into the release notes, or we're going to put in the announcement, and end users are going to see and applaud. Right.
Yep.
And as a product manager, of course, I'm mostly focused on stuff that's going to generate joy and or money on the part of my customers. But if I spend 100% of my points on pure feature, again, I'm digging myself in. So what is the rest of this? I would expect that there's 20 or 25%, depends on the situation, maybe as high as 30, that's for the collected set of things I think of as engineering internal consumption. So there's training, there's systems upgrades, there's automated test harnesses, there's pipeline improvements, there are performance, upgrades. There's a whole stack of things which ultimately pay us dividends, right? We're paying down all of the feature debt we've run up last quarter, or maybe even getting ahead of it, right? And to the extent that I put DevOps into that, which I do, now we get to have a much more nuanced discussion that says, of the 25% of our story points that we're going to spend on things that are not short-term customer visible, what's the trade-off between additional test coverage and better test harness and pipeline automation and automated detection of down processes and architectural improvements to reduce capacity limits, right? Whatever. And it's also true that the product managers, if they're smart and humble, will at this point, even if they formally have the decision authority, will be spending most of that asking the engineering team how to make good trade-offs, right? Because the engineering team is the group that lives and breathes and gets the direct payoff, so that next quarter and 2 quarters from now and 9 quarters from now, I can ship more product. I can get my automated test cycle and harness down to minutes, so that I can push out a patch if I had to and not cut another code line. So I can do good capacity planning and working around the spikes, right? Because next quarter I'm going to have all the same issues and outages and painful moments, right? And I'm going to get beaten up for the fact that this quarter we shortchanged all of the investments, right?
So I think you're saying as a rule of thumb, 50% for the visible stuff that you commit to,
right?
25% for the kind of the improving the way we work,
right? What's left? So this depends a lot on the kind of company you're in. I spend most of my time with software companies that are building for enterprise customers.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Big banks, big insurance companies, airlines, whatever. And it is inevitable that the largest of those customers have a bunch of crazy one-off things that connect to legacy systems and on and on and on. And so depending on the company and the culture, we probably spend between 10 and 15% of all of engineering on stuff that we have to do that's not very reusable or isn't so strategic or comes up in a particular sales opportunity. Right? And I try to budget for that rather than have that just sort of fall from the sky so that we can force good trade-offs there as well.
What you've said reminds me very much of something David Anderson said about Kanban and about Slack, basically saying that Slack gives you time to improve the way you work, and Slack gives you tactical agility to respond to things that you didn't know were going to happen. And in some ways, you're saying a similar thing, which is plan for 50%. That's the stuff you're committing to.
Right.
The other 50% lets you respond to things you weren't expecting.
But there's another dynamic here too, which is especially in an enterprise software company, there will always be a sales team that comes back from some meeting, and says, well, we could get a 9.6 million pound contract from Deutsche Bank, right? Or Audi, or whoever it is, right? All we need to do is this little one tiny improvement. By the way, what they want is to add teleportation to the product, right? And what they need it by Friday, right? And how hard could it be? It's probably only 10 lines of code, right? And so I can't, as the sort of conscience of the roadmap, I can't let those things go unanswered. I can't let them all be interrupted. So what I do is I negotiate with the head of sales that we're going to spend 635 story points this quarter on whatever crazy things he wants. But when they're spent, they're gone. And what that does is that sets up a trade-off between the crazy account team calling on Deutsche Bank and the crazy account team calling on Goldman Sachs and the crazy account team calling on Ford Motor Company or Boeing, right? Or whoever it is, the Singapore Telecom Company, because we can't let sales consume 18 and then 20 and then 30 and then 45%, or all is lost.
I suppose that's the thing, that then forces those things to be managed.
That's right.
Consciously traded off against each other, rather than just taking priority because it's the last thing someone asked for.
That's right. So I get to go back to the sales organization and have them fight with each other for the scarce resource, which is this allocated, planned portion of crazy stuff. And often it's not crazy. Often it's things that make perfect sense. But if I simply respond to things as if they are unexpected, and what I discover is that I spent 74% of our story points this quarter on random interrupts, and I got nothing else done. Right. So the point of picking out a number for the engineering internal work is to protect that, is to have a budget so that we can plan on it. We can do real sizing and work and trade-offs among ourselves and actually get it done. The classic counterexample here, since it's January in the US here for me, is all Americans join health clubs or gyms in January because in February they intend to go and get skinny again, right? And in February, when they haven't gone, they intend to go in March. And so health clubs and gyms make their money by charging for people who never show up. When we give the roadmap permission over to the sales organization, what happens is that every quarter we agree that DevOps and other engineering investments are really important to make next quarter. Right?
Yes. And we do that every quarter.
Right. But this quarter, just for this quarter, we're going to steal all of the overhead and improvements and, Slack creating things for sales one-offs.
Yeah. But I suppose, the other side of that is by allocating capacity for these things, you're setting up a kind of middle ground. You're not saying you have to add your thing to my roadmap and you might get it in 3 years.
That's right.
But equally, you're not saying we'll abandon anything on the roadmap for something.
And that's a heavy dose of realism, because when the VP of sales comes to the CEO, and I'm not in the room, and says, we have a $14 million proposal here, which, by the way, is exactly how much we have to bring in so that the CEO doesn't have to report to the board that we missed our earnings number, right? The CEO is going to say yes, right? Unless we've conditioned it some other way where this is a trade-off against some larger deal, right? So the reality, the political reality of enterprise software companies is that I can't say it's zero, and we will all fail and go home and have to get new jobs if it creeps up to 40%. Right? So what's the thing I do as the head of product that defends good practices, that keeps all of our planned roadmap features from being discarded? And that's to set up a fund here, and not to let it be exceeded.
So to me that sounds like almost like the best way that product managers could potentially support engineers taking a DevOps approach. And part of DevOps, of course, a big part of DevOps is continuously making the way you work better. And if you haven't got any slack to do that, then you won't.
That's right.
And in the long term, you're going to fall behind because you can't deliver. Are there other things that you think product managers should or can do to support a DevOps adoption?
I think there's a bunch of things. One of the two of them together. This is a paired set. So to folks outside of engineering, or certainly outside of engineering and product management, these improvements are almost invisible, right? Because there's no one who is applauding it, merchandising it, telling the company how good it is. Right? So when I think of my engineering team as a client base of mine, as one of my stakeholders, part of my product management team's job is to make engineering both feel successful and look successful, right? So how do we get a monthly, announcement out to the rest of the company that doesn't just list the features we added, but the improved test coverage and the added, transactional capacity and the faster speed of compilation and shipping and pushing to the right, whatever it is, right? So to the outside of engineering stakeholders, what we have to do is we have to attach value to these activities. And we have to remind everybody that they're spending the company's money on something that matters, because otherwise, when things are tough, they're going to decline. And then facing inward, and I have a pretty long post folks might find about how to motivate engineering and development teams, right? And folks on the sales side think this is about salaries and bonuses and giving away t-shirts, right? It's really about the technical folks finding meaning and value in what they do so that they come in motivated and they care about it. So as a product manager, I need to thank my engineering team for the things they do that I care about. So that's, DevOps champion of the quarter t-shirt, right? Stand up in front of the rest of the engineering group and let's applaud your improvements to the data science analytics, throughput metrics. Such that we can add 57 really big customers to our data science analytics platform, which we couldn't before because, Sally Sue DevOps figured out how to spin up more AWS instances that merge at the end, right? How do we make the work not just be important, but be recognized and felt as important? Because then my DevOps team comes in every day saying, we matter, we're important, the customer revenue drives through us. Rich and his product management team think what we do matters, and they thank us for it.
And it's, just slightly related to that, in a lot of the previous chats, we've talked about how motivation for engineers, a lot of this comes from autonomy and having a say in how you do things. And earlier you mentioned training. I want to find out about the latest tech. I need some time to do that. I need to experiment. And so what you were saying about allowing time for that, again, I suppose feeds into the motivation, because it's letting engineers do what they want to do and work in a way that they feel is good.
I'm trying to remember, is it Daniel Pink that has all that study
about?
The
autonomy mastery and
he's spot on. And so when I I've often popped into companies where the engineering team is really frustrated and not just unmotivated but demotivated, right? And and the executive team wants to impose longer hours so that people sit at their chairs longer and maybe type more as a way to boost morale, right? In the old saying, we used to say, we're going to keep whipping the oarsmen until, morale improves. And instead, there's this whole charm campaign that we have to mount from the product management side to bring in, recordings of customer interviews and explain why customers love our products and why your particular block of code or your particular piece of testing is leading to customer joy, so that as a development team, they come back in every day with some mission, with some enthusiasm. We have to connect the dots between your individual work and joy or money on the revenue side of the business. Otherwise, at least here in Silicon Valley, there's 85,000 engineering jobs that are going begging. If you come in being unmotivated and your phone rings and it's some recruiter, we lose you to some other company. So building both time and effort in on the product management side to keep the engineering team as a whole, including DevOps, focused on why it matters, right? As a customer, I need this stuff not to burn up every time I touch the keyboard. Is this central epic behind all of DevOps, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And I come to my keyboard in the morning to get my, analytics stuff to work. It's supposed to be there, right? And nobody's going to say, well, here's who's responsible for, for not failing. But how do I make that a mission? How do I make that matter?
Yes. I mean, it's connecting. And again, this has come up before, that particularly if you're part of a large organization or working on a big product, it can be difficult for you to see the difference your lines of code are actually making to someone out there in the real world.
That's right. And so the head of product, if it's a large organization, has to make that case for the engineering organization as a whole. The individual product managers or product owners, if that's how you've carved up life, need to find mission and meaning, certainly at the epic level. I think at the story level, it's not important. But how do we find at least once or twice a week some little snippet of customer input where they said, oh gosh, that workflow was really slow and unresponsive, and now I can get my thing done. Okay. Thank you, Albert and Sajeev and Mary, who worked on speeding up that particular Ajax call, because here's the proof that somebody cared.
And just before you touched on the kind of the political environment in a large organization, or I suppose even the culture, and you were talking about the COO and sales. Are there other aspects of the politics that you think are important to influence?
Yeah, I think it's really, really, really important to remind everyone in the company all the time about the sort of top order job to be done. Right. So, we ship, pipeline test equipment so that our customers who build nuclear reactors, won't have failing pipes that spill nuclear, waste into the oceans, right? And that kind of job to be done, mission-driven, top-down, customer value. It's not always about money. Lets everyone further down make good decisions, right? So, and then I'll devolve down to an example here. But as a product manager or as a head of product, I actually want to make fewer and fewer decisions. I want to lead the smart people to making good decisions, right? Because one, I don't know everything. Two, I'm not the smartest kid at the table. I know this because if you ask the engineers, they'll all tell me that they're smarter than I am, right? And so, for instance, a good example here, let's imagine I've got an infinitely deep stack of bugs to be fixed, right? And every company does. Right? I could, as the product manager or product owner, grab the iron fist and say, I'm going to decide, prioritize 1 through N. I'm the boss of you, right? It takes time, it takes energy, and it has a lot of errors in it. I could instead say, we're going to have a very brief weekly meeting between the head quality or QA person, somebody from engineering and somebody from tech support. and I'm going to ask them to do the first order pass on this and force rank. We're only going to fix 65 story points a week or a month or whatever it is. So take your best guess among you of how you would force rank 65 story points worth of bug fixes. Right? Now, I reserve the right to know that some big customer has some bug up wherever it is that the bug is, about something further down the stack, and there's political juice around fixing something. But in most weeks, what I do is I sit back.
Yeah.
I let the smart kids at the table make good decisions. I do less work. They are more invested in the results. They care more about finding the answers than just doing what I tell them. We get more done. We're all happier, right? So, but I can't do that unless the top level mission and the sort of epic level, product level stories aren't clear, because then folks are going to be unclear about the distinction between, well, how do we trade off capacity versus ease of use versus whatever, right?
Yeah.
And if we've listened to customer conversations every week for the last year, everyone in the room has a good idea of the current trade-off between capacity and ease of use, and we'll make the right decision.
Yeah.
Right? So my job is as much to communicate the framework to everyone, right? So marketing needs to know why we're selling things and who we're selling them to, because they always have good ideas for other customer bases that have no use for what we do, right? And sales needs to be clear about why we're selling this, because they always see the cash at the end of the week and the lease on the Porsche or the Tesla, and they're trying to sell the wrong thing to the wrong people, right? So how do we focus on customer goodness and value? And then everybody gets to make most of the decisions for themselves, and the product management folks only steer.
Which, and it's really interesting, isn't it? Because I would say it's a fairly common idea that product manager decides what to build and when, what the priority is, and development team, developers do that in the order they're told to.
And I think that's sort of vaguely true, but it's not really true, right? So your product manager doesn't know your internal technology as well as your team does. Isn't allowed to or shouldn't size anything, right? Trade-offs are complicated, and often the best solution to the problem is around the table. Yeah. So as the product manager, I get to set the priority of problems we're going to solve. That's different from telling people what to do.
Yeah. And I mean, I think what you're touching on there, I cannot even count the number of times where eventually you can find a really simple solution that's better than what was originally asked for. In other words, it cost you less to do something,
of course,
and the result was more valuable than the original idea.
That said, on the other hand, it's the product manager's job to pull the team back when they've gone too far, right? So engineering, I forget whose law it is, but eventually an engineering team will decide that every single line of code needs to be refactored, right? Yes. And we're not spending 100% of our time on refactoring. Right? Somebody on the engineering team will cook up some really, really cool feature which makes no sense or is not important or isn't going to drive revenue. And the product manager has to gently say, that's a wonderful idea. I love that idea. Let me put that way, 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 way down in the backlog where it belongs. And let's focus on what matters, because I'm the one who spends more time with customers, right? But it's humble, it's steering. If you've got what I see in the sort of imperial product manager job, where I slap the backlog on the table and you guys in engineering do what I tell you, we get bad results. We sub-optimize. We build features where we implement features the way the product manager thinks they should be implemented, which are often right and often wrong, right? But if I'm doing a really good job as a product manager, my team comes to me, and if they're polite, they do it offline. Actually, they never do it offline. They always do it in the meeting. But they get to say, that's a really good idea, and that's a really stupid strategy to get to that idea. And I should thank them for it and say, gosh, how smart you folks are. Thanks for saving us from the wrong approach, right? Instead of, F you, I'm the boss, do it my way, stand here, right? I mean, We all know, if we go all the way back to the sort of Agile manifesto, right? We value people over processes,
Yes. Yeah.
right? We value expertise. There's some person on the engineering team who probably isn't the most senior or even the lead person who really knows how to fix this particular problem. And everybody knows in the room who it is. So let's look in that direction and ask her, what the best way to optimize that SQL statement is, right? I don't know. And I don't need to know.
No,
right?
no.
Unless we're shipping SQL statement compilers, right? My job as a product manager is to get the best out of the team against the problems we have to solve. And it's motivating to everyone to get to throw in on, brainstorming.
So and something we see a lot, I think, when we're talking about DevOps, is this emphasis on collaboration.
Yes.
And the name is a bit confusing because sometimes people think, it's closer collaboration between devs people and ops people, but really it's closer collaboration between everyone who needs to work together to make a product.
Right. And in general, for me, I don't delve into the DevOps stuff enough to really either deeply understand it or make any good trade-offs. But I want to set the parameters that say, which DevOps issues are the hot ones. Where are we going to spend our next 6 precious weeks of our DevOps team? It's going to deliver either internal value to engineering or external value to customers. So we're not optimizing the wrong thing.
Yeah, I mean that's fantastic. I'm conscious of time. There's one last question I want to ask, and it might be an impossible question. So.
How hard could it be?
I'm wondering, with your broad experience, whether you think there's like one thing an organization or product managers can typically do that will almost certainly make things better. And that, as I say, might be an impossible question because it might be very context dependent.
Better. So let me give you two quick halves of that, because there's an internal and external facing. Right?
Yep.
The external facing things that I think product managers can do that make life better is they should always carry printed out in their hand or pocket or purse the current quarter roadmap and the current quarter backlog, at least the top 50 items. So that in every single meeting where someone comes to them and says, I have a really good idea, customer said, demand,
they can check.
Right. Because if you don't have that list with you, what you say is, no, you can't have it, right? Which just frustrates everybody. What you want to say is, that's a wonderful idea. Help me understand how the 15 things we've committed to at the top of our list are all less important than your imagined in the shower feature, because that sets the right tone for, I respect you.
Yeah.
I'm just not going to give you what you want. Right?
Yes. Well, I suppose what it's saying, and I have to say, and I've been surprised in the past how if people know what so the example I have is in the past with a team where we had a support team, we had project managers wanting things delivered, we had sales who wanted new features. Actually, most of the time, if you've got those groups together and said, this is our list, most they could agree on the priority.
Right. And it's that they've forgotten that other people are getting things because they need something, right? It's urgent. And there must be bandwidth because I need it, right?
So being able to produce that and say, well, but this is what we're planning.
That's right. And it's not about personality. It's about, here's what's in the plan, right?
Yeah.
And it looks more important to me. Help me understand. And then inward facing, I think it's all about, I think attaching, celebrating the small wins. Mm-hmm. Okay. So we don't wait until the annual meeting to call some one person up. What we want to do is we want to applaud at the team level every week or every 2 weeks or whatever it is, the couple of things we did that were really good. Yeah. And that gives us permission to ask the non-personalized retrospective question of, well, so what could we collectively do better next week? Now that we've celebrated the fact that we got some good things done, it's nobody's fault. We're all trying hard, but help me help you figure out what we're going to do next week that's better. Because we're all successful, we would just like to be a little more successful. So that sort of mix of, what we call the feedback sandwich, right? Yeah. You did great. Now how are we going to do better next week?
And it's two things, Ed, that are so important in my experience. One is that actually the way you get better in a year is by getting a little bit better every week.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
So let's not try and have a plan and celebrate at the end of the year. As you say, you need to recognize it when it happens, because otherwise it won't. And,
right.
But also, as you say, that I remember my team's retrospectives. It was always so much easier to talk about what went badly and what we could do better once you'd talked about what went well.
That's right.
And once we got into the habit of that, I found people were quite comfortable about sticking up things that they felt personally they hadn't done. To begin with, people were perhaps a little bit reluctant to say, this went badly for me.
We're not punishing anyone. No. We're not firing anybody. We're not taking away their bonus or their keyboard, right? But let's own what went well, and let's own what didn't go well. And next week we'll find some 1.5% better way to do it. Yeah. And at the end of the year, we've compounded it, and we're twice as good.
So that's, two cracking bits of advice. So carry a list around with you of the roadmap to whip out whenever anyone asks for something unexpected. And the other thing is celebrate. I was going to say the small successes, but every success as it happens on a very regular basis. No,
indeed. Good.
Two great pieces of advice. So, thank you so much. I mean, these videos are always really interesting for me. I learn so much each time, and that, I think, particularly because product management isn't my field at all. It's been really inspirational, and
I've been told it's not my field either sometimes.
And I'm really looking forward now to the Twitter chat online as well. So thanks again, Rich, for taking the time to speak with us and join us.
And thanks for keeping this going and doing all the community building that you do.
Great stuff. Thanks very much. Speak soon.
Okay.